My name is Grace Weller. I'm 74 years old. Last month, my daughter slapped me across the face at my own birthday party in front of 50 guests and called me a disgrace. It wasn't a drunken outburst or a heated argument. It was calculated, public, and sharp enough to make the music stop and every glass of champagne freeze midair. I stood there, holding a box I had spent weeks preparing for her, and I didn't say a word. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about clarity, about how years of silence can build into something stronger than shouting. I'm not here to make anyone feel sorry for me. I just want to tell the truth, as plainly as I lived it. For most of my life, I believed that love and patience were enough to hold a family together. I thought that if I gave more, stayed quiet, forgave quickly, everything would work itself out. But the moment her hand touched my face, I understood something I should have known a long time ago. Sometimes, silence doesn't protect you. Sometimes, it erases you. And that day, I decided I would not be erased anymore. The morning of my 74th birthday started the way most of them do. I woke up before the sun, the house still wrapped in shadows. Too quiet to feel like a celebration. There was no knock on the door. No phone ringing with cheerful voices. Just a single text from Rachel. It read, "Be ready by 9. No happy birthday. No heart." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Then set the phone down and went to boil water for tea. My favorite mug sat by the sink. It had a small crack along the rim, but I could never bring myself to throw it out. Paul had bought it during our first winter in Colorado. He used to joke that it was the only thing I loved more than him. The kettle hissed gently as I dropped in the chamomile bag and watched the steam rise. For a moment, I could almost hear his footsteps shuffling down the hallway. Paul always made breakfast on my birthday. Scrambled eggs, one slice of toast, and a muffin with a candle stuck in slightly crooked. He's been gone for 4 years. But on mornings like this, it doesn't feel like he's far. I carried my tea to the window seat and watched the trees sway outside. The wind moved through the pines the way he used to brush my hair back behind my ears. Quiet and gentle. The box sat on the table. Small. Wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a ribbon that had taken me 3 tries to get right. Inside were letters Paul had written the week Rachel was born. He never gave them to her. Said he would when she was ready. I found them after he passed, folded neatly in the back of his sock drawer. Each one dated and sealed. Written in that careful print of his that always made me feel safe. I had been holding on to them for years. Today, I was going to give them to her. My hands shook as I adjusted the ribbon. It wasn't just the arthritis. I was nervous. Not scared. Exactly. But unsure. Would she cry, would she understand, or would she brush it off like one more relic from a version of me she no longer recognized? I got dressed in a navy sweater and gray slacks. Nothing fancy. I pulled my hair back in a loose knot and added a bit of powder to my face. The way Paul used to say, made me look like myself. Then I sat by the front door and waited. The box on my lap. The clock ticked louder than usual. I glanced down at the gift and took a deep breath. Have you ever held something in your hands? Knowing it could heal someone, or break you both wide open, that's where I was. Alone in a quiet house, holding love wrapped in paper. The car arrived exactly at 9. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows and a driver I didn't recognize. He opened the door without a word. Like I was being summoned. Not celebrated. The ride into town was silent. I kept the box on my lap. My hands resting gently over the ribbon. Every bump in the road sent a tiny jolt through my chest. But I kept my eyes on the passing trees, trying to calm the tightness in my stomach. Rachel's house wasn't really a house anymore. It was a 3-story structure of glass and angles. perched above a river with no sign of warmth. Everything about it looked like it belonged in a magazine. Cold and curated. The yard was lined with staff in matching black outfits. Some held clipboards. Others directed traffic. When I stepped out, a young woman with a headset gave me a quick nod and motioned toward the entrance, never asking my name. Inside, the lights were almost too bright. Music thumped softly through hidden speakers. The kind you hear in high-end stores where no one actually dances. Lavender and silver decorations covered every surface. But nothing felt personal. I stood near the doorway, scanning the room. Dozens of well-dressed strangers filled the space, laughing softly over champagne and talking about projects, marketing, and IPOs. No one looked my way. No one asked if I was Grace. No one said happy birthday. A woman with sharp heels and sharper lipstick asked if I was the florist. Another thought I was catering staff. I smiled politely and said nothing. The box felt heavier in my arms. Then I saw Rachel. She stood beneath a silver archway with a photographer at her side. She wore a pale cream suit and her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked sculpted. She waved when she saw me. Just a flick of her fingers. Then turned away. There was no hug. No smile. No mother. No daughter. Just a brief acknowledgement. Like you'd give to someone who delivered a package. I was guided to a lounge in the back, where a young man handed me a flute of sparkling water and told me to relax. The fireplace wasn't real. Just flickering light on a screen. I sat down. Alone. The box still in my lap. For a moment, I just watched the crowd. Rachel moved effortlessly between guests, laughing at the right moments, pausing for photos, offering handshakes like she was hosting a product launch. That's what this was. Not a birthday. Not for me. There were no family photos. No familiar faces. No old friends from her childhood. Just polished strangers with perfect teeth and expensive shoes, smiling into the lights and sipping things I couldn't pronounce. I looked down at the box and fixed the ribbon. I had imagined giving it to her in a quiet moment. Maybe at home. Just the two of us. But I knew now there would be no quiet moment here. She had turned my birthday into a brand, a stage, and I wasn't the guest of honor. I was just part of the decor. Still, I stayed seated. I didn't want to cause a scene, but something in me shifted. I stopped hoping. I stopped wondering if this was all a misunderstanding. I understood. This wasn't love wrapped in awkwardness. This was distance dressed up as celebration. And deep down, I knew something else was coming. Something bigger than silence. I saw Edwin arrive just after the speeches had started. He stood by the glass doors for a moment, holding a dark velvet box close to his chest. He looked around the room with quiet purpose. Not hesitation. Like a man fulfilling a promise. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod. That one gesture told me everything I needed to know. Paul had sent him. And whatever was in that box, today was the day it was meant to reach me. Edwin moved slowly through the crowd. A few guests glanced at him, unsure if he belonged. He didn't explain himself. He just walked straight to where I sat. He placed the box on the table beside my untouched drink and rested his hand on the lid. He said it was from Paul. Meant for me. And that only I had the right to open it. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I looked into his face instead, searching for something steady. Something safe. Before I could speak, Rachel appeared. She moved fast and quiet, like she'd been watching from across the room. She stood between us, her body angled protectively toward the box. Her voice dropped low, tight with warning. And she asked what this was. Edwin answered calmly. He said it was something Paul had asked him to deliver to me. Today. And that it had nothing to do with anyone else. Rachel looked from him to me. Then back again. Her mouth flattened. "So we're doing this here," she said, loud enough for heads to turn. She gestured slightly, and a photographer drifted closer. I didn't move. Neither did Edwin. The room began to shift. Conversations fading. Attention narrowing toward us, like light through a lens. I felt the air stretch tight. Like a wire about to snap. Rachel's voice rose. Clear and sharp. She told the room I had betrayed her father. She said I had been having an affair with Edwin. Her hand pointed. Her eyes dared anyone to question her. Gasps rippled outward. A glass clinked against a table. Then silence. She said I had shamed Paul. That I had kept secrets. That the box in front of me was a final insult to a man I supposedly loved. Then she lifted her hand. It wasn't violent. Just sharp. A single slap across my cheek. The sound echoed against the marble floor and glass walls. No one said a word. I didn't lift my hand. I didn't blink. I just looked at her. Not with anger. Not even hurt. Just stillness. The kind that settles in when something inside you finally breaks free. Edwin stepped back. The box remained where it was. Rachel stood frozen. Her chest rising and falling. The crowd didn't move. A woman near the bar sipped from her glass and avoided my eyes. I stood slowly. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I walked past the table. Past the cameras. Through the doors. And out into the air. The wind was cool. The sky was clear. I kept walking. Behind me, the music resumed faintly. Like nothing had happened. But everything had. They had taken something from me in that moment. Not just dignity. Not just peace. Something deeper. And I would get it back. Not through shouting. Not through revenge. But on my terms. Quiet. Precise. Certain. I didn't call a car. I walked. My coat was thin against the wind. But I didn't feel cold. My legs moved without thinking. Like they knew I needed space before I did. A few blocks down, I found myself near the park. It wasn't planned. My feet just took me there. The same place where Paul used to bring Rachel when she was little. Back when she still reached for my hand without thinking. There was a bench near the fountain. The one with peeling paint and a slight tilt to the left. Paul used to sit there, tossing bits of bread to the ducks while Rachel twirled in the grass. I sat down slowly, feeling the cool metal press through my coat. The street was quiet. Just the hum of traffic in the distance and the rustle of wind in the trees. I watched a couple walk by with their dog, laughing softly. They didn't notice me. That felt strange. And also right. I thought about the box. Still sitting on that table. Velvet covered. Full of something no one but me was meant to touch. But that wasn't what hurt the most. What was taken from me in that room wasn't an object. It was my place. In front of those people, my daughter turned me into a stranger. Not just with her words. With her eyes. With the slap. She rewrote who I was with a gesture, and let everyone else fill in the rest. It wasn't about the accusation. It wasn't even about Edwin. It was about erasure. That quiet, creeping thing that happens when someone stops seeing you as human and starts treating you like a problem. I didn't cry. Not yet. My face still burned. Not from the slap. But from what it meant. She didn't believe I'd do anything about it. She thought I would take it the way I always had. Silent. Polite. And maybe, for a moment, she was right. But something shifted. Not anger. Not revenge. Just clarity. Cold and steady. Like the wind moving through the trees behind me. I thought of Paul. How he used to say the real test of strength wasn't what you said, but how long you could sit with the truth. That day, I sat with mine, quiet, still, and I decided I was done being quiet for the sake of other people's comfort. This wasn't about a box anymore. This was about the person I refused to stop being. The person I refused to let them erase. The morning after the party, I called Paul's old attorney. Her name was Margaret Delaney. But Paul always called her Maggie. She hadn't heard from me in years. But when I gave my name, she paused only a second before telling me to come in. Her office hadn't changed. Warm wood shelves, a ticking wall clock, and the same scent of cedar and something older. She met me at the door, professional as ever. But her eyes softened when she saw my face. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "I've been expecting you." Then she walked me to a leather chair and opened a drawer behind her desk. She pulled out 3 envelopes. One marked for me. One for her. One for Edwin. All in Paul's handwriting. All sealed. She placed the first one in my hands and sat quietly while I opened it. His words were steady. Written 3 months before he died. He wrote about love. About trust. About knowing me better than I knew myself. And then he explained the box. He had asked Edwin to deliver it on my 74th birthday. Not earlier. Not later. It was meant to reach me only if I was ready to hear what it carried. He had feared interference. Not from strangers. From our daughter. Paul said he had seen it coming. The way Rachel questioned everything he did, especially if I was involved. He wrote that something had changed in her tone. A sharpness. A hunger for control he didn't know how to name. Then he mentioned something else. He had once caught Rachel trying to sign his name on a document. It was linked to a long-forgotten investment account. She hadn't gotten far. But it had been enough for him to act. The second envelope held instructions for Maggie. If anything happened, if Rachel made accusations or attempted to block the box, Maggie had full authority to act on my behalf. Paul had signed, notarized, and filed it months before he passed. He left no room for doubt. The third envelope, the one for Edwin, was shorter. A simple directive. He wasn't just a friend. He was the legal custodian of the box. No one else could claim it. Not even Rachel. Especially not Rachel. Maggie waited while I read. She didn't speak until I looked up. Then she said, "Paul trusted you. He trusted you more than anyone." I held the papers close to my chest. Not like legal protection. Like proof. For years, I told myself I was being dramatic. That Rachel was just busy. Just stressed. But Paul had seen it clearly. He had planned for this. And he had chosen me to hold the line. In the letter, he never once blamed me. Not for trusting too long. Not for hoping too much. He just asked me not to let silence win. Not this time. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. What I felt was steadier than that. Not victory. Not relief. Just a quiet power beginning to return to where it had always belonged. In my hands. By the time I left Maggie's office, the sky had cleared. The light wasn't warm yet. But it was enough to see the next step. Enough to know I wouldn't be walking in circles anymore. We met at a quiet garden cafe by the lake. Rachel chose it. The kind of place with white wrought iron chairs, linen napkins, and a menu that changed with the seasons. I arrived 5 minutes early and sat where I could see the water. She was already there. Pale green dress. Flawless makeup. A soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She stood to greet me. Kissed my cheek like nothing had ever happened. And complimented my hair. We made small talk over tea and lemon scones. The weather. Her work with the foundation. How busy everything had been. I let her talk. I nodded when it made sense to. I kept my hands folded in my lap. right over the silk pouch, with the recorder inside. About 20 minutes in, her tone shifted. Her voice dropped just enough to feel intimate. She leaned across the table and rested her hand gently on mine. She said it would be easier for everyone if I stepped back from the estate. She said it would avoid confusion. Keep the press from asking difficult questions. Keep our family's image clean and cohesive. I let her keep going. She talked about legacy planning, branding, media alignment. She used words like continuity and optics and said them with a smile. She never once said the word mother. To her, I wasn't a person. I was a risk. An unpredictable variable. A story she wanted to rewrite with cleaner lines and better lighting. She paused just long enough to see if I'd speak. I didn't. I simply reached for my tea and took a slow sip. Then I told her she looked well. That I was proud of how composed she had been lately. Her smile faltered for a second. Then returned. When the check came, she reached for it. I insisted. She laughed. Said I didn't have to. But I did. I reached into my bag. Pressed stop on the recorder. And paid the bill without another word. She walked me to the sidewalk and hugged me lightly. Said we should do this again soon. I smiled and said I'd like that. Then I watched her walk away. Phone already in hand. Probably scheduling her next move. What she didn't know was that the real move had already happened. Not with shouting. Not with accusations. But with a single button and the truth she had given me willingly. Rachel called it a legacy dinner. The invitations were printed on thick ivory cardstock with gold trim. Every detail carefully chosen. It was held at a boutique hotel downtown. All glass walls and soft chandeliers. With music that whispered instead of played like Hassery. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not a second more. Maggie walked beside me in a dark navy coat. Her briefcase in hand. Edwin followed quietly. Carrying the velvet box like it was part of his spine now. Not just something he held. No one greeted us. No one expected us. But Rachel noticed. She stood beneath a floral arch. Champagne in hand. Smile tight and glossy. Her eyes flicked toward me. Then away. Like I was a shadow caught in the corner of a photograph. The guests were dressed in silk and certainty. Their conversations floated through the room like perfume. Light and practiced. I could hear talk of partnerships. Endowments. Family values. But no one mentioned what had happened. Halfway through the second course. Rachel tapped her glass. She stood slowly. With the kind of poise that photographs well. She spoke about family. Gratitude. And honoring her father's legacy. She made it sound like love. Then she gestured toward the glass pedestal near the front. Where the velvet box had been placed with care. She said it symbolized closure. A bridge between past and future. A final note in harmony. That was my cue. I stood without rushing. Maggie stepped forward and placed the charter folder on the table. Edwin walked to the pedestal. Lifted the box. And handed it to me. Rachel froze. I didn't look at her. I looked at the room. At the faces pretending not to remember the slap. I held the microphone gently and thanked them for being here. I said this dinner was not just to honor Paul. It was to honor the values he stood for. And the woman he trusted to protect them. Then I announced the formation of the Paul and Grace Foundation. A trust dedicated to helping women in later life who had been silenced, displaced, or manipulated by those closest to them. I said the words calmly. I didn't shake. Maggie raised the documentation so the cameras could see it. Edwin stood beside her. Firm and silent. I opened the box and took out Paul's letter. I read the first line aloud. Just the first. Then I stopped. I placed the letter back inside. The rest wasn't for them. It was for me. Behind me. The foundation's mission flashed on a screen. Press kits had already been sent. Everything was filed. Everything was final. Rachel didn't move. Her hands were clenched around her glass. Her smile had faded. Her voice, for once, was nowhere. I looked at her only once. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just with certainty. This wasn't revenge. It was a return. A quiet, steady reclaiming of what had always been mine. My name. Me dignity. My story. Afterward, Maggie stayed behind to speak with the press. Edwin and I slipped out the side door into the cool evening. The stars were just starting to break through the haze. The box was still in my hands. But for the first time, it felt light. So did I. I didn't want something grand. Just a small space. Something quiet. Steady. And honest. I found a room inside a community center near the edge of town. It wasn't downtown. It wasn't sleek or expensive. But it had soft lighting. Thick carpets. And a large window that looked out onto a courtyard filled with oaks and gravel paths. I named it the Quiet Room. Not because it was silent, but because it welcomed the kind of silence that heals, the kind that gives women space to speak only when they're ready. I didn't advertise. I just opened the door and waited. The first person who came in was a woman named Linda. She was 71, a retired nurse with silver hair, soft eyes, and hands that never stopped fidgeting. She told me her daughter had moved in after losing her job. At first, it felt like family. But then slowly, she stopped asking Linda about decisions, started treating her like furniture. One night, Linda sat alone in the kitchen while a party played out in her own backyard. No one invited her. Not even a glance. When she finished telling me, she looked down and whispered a question. How do you stop apologizing for simply existing? I didn't have a polished answer. I just told her the truth. That I hadn't stopped apologizing all at once. I had just started taking up space again. Quietly. Without asking. That afternoon, we sat longer in silence than in words. The next week, she brought a friend. Then another. And then it wasn't just stories. It was recognition. Women hearing echoes of themselves in someone else's voice. There were different names. Different cities. Different details. But one common thread. Women who had given everything to families that had quietly pushed them to the side. Not with violence. With dismissal. Some had been caretakers their whole lives. Others had been married for decades, and suddenly found themselves alone. A few had lost their homes. Their roles. Their place at the table. All of them were grieving something that didn't even have a proper name. We didn't try to fix it. We let it sit. We let it breathe. And over time, something shifted. I brought tea some days. Other days we just sat with our hands folded. Knees touching. Words, optional. No one rushed to fill the air. No one told anyone to move on. We just stayed. Together. The world outside didn't change. But inside that room, we did. We found each other. And in the smallest, simplest way, we started to come back to life. Not loud. Not fast. Just real. One voice at a time. The air smelled like lavender and fresh grass. The sun had begun to settle behind the trees, casting soft light across the garden. I set the tray down gently on the wooden bench Paul built the summer after Rachel was born. The wood creaked beneath me the way it always had, like it remembered who we used to be. I poured 2 cups of tea. Slow and steady. One for now. One for the woman I used to be. I placed the second cup across from me, the steam curling gently in the quiet air. It wasn't for Paul. It wasn't for Rachel. It was for the version of me who stayed small for the sake of peace. She had spent years nodding through discomfort, smiling through disrespect, shrinking herself into whatever shape the room needed. She believed that love alone could fix everything. That if she was kind enough, patient enough, quiet enough, they would hear her without her ever having to speak. I know now that wasn't true. The chrysanthemums Paul planted were in full bloom. White petals reaching for light without apology. They lined the path like witnesses. They had come back. Even after everything. I sat with that cup like I was sitting with an old friend. I didn't blame her. I didn't shame her. I just let her be. She had survived what she thought she had to. And now, I could let her rest. I didn't need Rachel to apologize. I didn't need her to change. I didn't even need her to understand. What I needed. I had already given myself. Room to breathe. A name I no longer whispered. A voice I no longer buried. That second cup sat full as the light faded. It wasn't sad. It wasn't bitter. It was still. I sipped my tea and watched the petals move gently in the wind. The world didn't owe me anything. But I had chosen myself. And that was enough. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, I want you to know you're not alone. Maybe you were the one who stayed quiet so others could be loud. Maybe you kept the peace even when it cost you something you couldn't name. I carried silence for a long time. Not because I was weak, but because I thought it was love. Now I know strength doesn't always speak first, but it always shows up in the end. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, I hope you'll share it. Not for likes or views, but because stories connect us. Sometimes healing begins with knowing someone else understands. Leave a comment if you've ever had to reclaim your place. Or just sit with the feeling for a while. That's enough too. The second cup on my table is still warm. The white chrysanthemums outside the window are still standing. And somewhere out there, someone else is getting ready to speak for the first time in years. Your voice matters. It always has, even if no one's told you that yet.